And now, the Deeper Thinking Podcast, a space for ideas and reflections in our uncertain times.
Welcome to the Deeper Thinking Podcast. In this extended episode, we'll be exploring ADHD not as a disorder to be fixed, but as a divergent intelligence to be understood, drawing on the work of over 35 theorists, clinicians, philosophers, and neurodivergent voices. Spanning more than 7 decades of research and reflection, we examine ADHD through the lenses of time perception, executive function, emotional regulation, trauma, somatic memory, masking, motivation, shame, cultural misattunement, neurodivergence, disability justice, epistemic injustice, educational architecture, care, rest, and relational design. Fidgeting is not a flaw. It is a body keeping time with a world that refuses to listen. It is the signal before the story, the tempo before the task. Long before pathology, there is perception, the moment your hands move faster than your mouth, when silence becomes unbearable because the noise inside is louder than speech. ADHD begins not with disruption but with dissonance, a mismatch between internal rhythm and external demand. As Erin Manning writes, attention is not absence but movement. The ADHD mind is not inattentive, it is attending elsewhere to everything all at once. The classroom punishes the drift, the delay, the non sequitur. But what if those are not errors, but kinetic truths? Dr. Russell Barkley's work names this rupture precisely. ADHD is not a deficit of knowing but of doing in time. It is temporal myopia, a present so sticky the future becomes unreal. Dr. Tarp. Alan Brown adds that time for the ADHD individual is not linear, it is distorted, affective, episodic. There is no smooth arc from intention to action, only emotional friction between now and next. Michel Foucault reminds us that diagnosis is never neutral. It is a regime of visibility, of sorting. ADHD is not simply discovered. It is constituted by systems that privilege consistency, obedience, and output. Against that machinery, the ADHD mind becomes unruly and necessary, a form of epistemic resistance. And yet, this mind is not disorder, it is divergence. Dr. Ned Hallowell describes it as a Ferrari brain with bicycle brakes, while Dr. William Dodson explains that ADHD motivation does not respond to importance or consequence, but to interest, novelty, challenge, and urgency. The ADHD nervous system is not lazy, it is interest-based. Lauren Ballant's idea of cruel optimism finds home here. The fantasy that with just the right planner or productivity hack, one can finally earn rest, finally become legible. But ADHD does not fail because it resists control. It fails under the weight of misfitted systems. Dr. Stuart Shanker would call this a failure of regulation, not of will. What emerges is not pathology but poetics. Bayo Akomolafi tells us the times are urgent, so we must slow down. ADHD does not lag behind, it pulls us out of false urgency. Dr. Per. Gabor Mate sees ADHD not as disease, but as adaptation. The mind learned to scatter because the present once felt unsafe. Dr. Resma Menachem would say that such scattering is the body in survival mode, vibrating with unprocessed memory. ADHD is not a single mind. It is often a lineage of nervous systems still scanning for danger. In this way, it is not dysfunction. It is ancestral pattern. The body does not forget. As Dr. Bessel van der Kolk writes, trauma lives in tissue, not just thought. It becomes posture, tension, impulse. ADHD, when viewed through this lens, is not just executive dysfunction, but embodied history. The child who cannot sit still may be metabolizing an atmosphere, not a task. The adult who spirals at a calendar reminder may be responding to the ghosts of unmet expectations, not the event itself. Dr. Peter Levine teaches that the body seeks completion. Unfinished stress cycles replay as overwhelm, panic, or shutdown. The ADHD mind is not erratic. It is reenacting something that was never resolved. This is why regulation is relational. Dr. Bonnie Badenoch insists that healing is not self-managed, it is co-regulated. Safety enters the system through attunement, not advice. ADHD doesn't respond to better instructions. It responds to being seen without correction. Dr. Thomas E. Brown's model includes emotion as core executive function, not an accessory symptom, but a structural hinge. The flood is not weakness, it is signal. Dr. Kristen Willemier shows that in ADHD, the default mode network, home of inner narrative, is overactive. The mind loops not because it is defective, but because it is narrating too fast, too raw, too much. Feeling becomes the architecture. Eugene Gendlin's felt sense suggests that meaning lives in the body before it ever becomes language. ADHD isn't a failure to think. It is thinking at the speed of sensation. Dr. Nicole Tetroe reminds us that many ADHD individuals have high interoceptive awareness. They feel internal states intensely, but lack scaffolding to interpret them. The result is overwhelm misnamed as volatility. As Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett argues, emotion is not reaction, it is construction. ADHD may be a mind that builds emotional reality with too much raw data and too little cultural patience. This is where cultural difference sharpens the frame. Dr. Monica Williams shows how ADHD is underdiagnosed in communities of colour and over-policed in black children. Dr. Saidiya Hartman's theory of narrative restraint warns us that even when difference is seen, it must often perform its pain to be believed. ADHD in this context is not just neurodivergence, it is diagnostic opacity shaped by race, class, and historical dispossession. Imani Barbarin and Vilissa Thompson argue that the neurodivergent conversation must include disability justice, not just awareness, but access, authorship, and rest. Rest, as Tricia Hersey insists, is not a luxury. It is refusal. It is divine. It is the birthright of those whose minds have never been allowed to stop performing. Performance in the ADHD context often becomes survival. Kieran Rose describes the cost of masking, not just in autistic lives, but across neurodivergent spectrums. To appear competent, focused, well-regulated requires constant vigilance, managing tone, suppressing impulse, simulating calm. Over time, this leads to burnout, not from doing too little, but from doing too much invisibly. Dr. Devon Price calls this the hidden labour of seeming normal, and in Laziness Does Not Exist, he exposes how moral narratives about effort erase structural overwhelm. ADHD is not apathy, it is often chronic depletion disguised as inconsistency. This depletion is often misunderstood because ADHD traits, hyperfocus, intuition, disruption, do not map cleanly onto deficit models. Dr. Joel Nigg's research on epigenetics and environmental modulation reminds us that ADHD expression is shaped by toxins, diet, stress, and relational fragmentation. It is not purely hereditary, it is ecological. Dr. L. Alan Sroufe emphasises that early relational experiences scaffold regulatory capacities. What looks like attention loss may be attachment rupture. ADHD is not a fixed identity. It is an ongoing negotiation between biology, environment, and narrative. Dr. Thomas Insel, former NIMH director, admitted that despite decades of investment in neuroscience, outcomes haven't improved because the focus was too narrow. What ADHD needs is not just better meds or tighter diagnoses, it needs conceptual hospitality. As Nick Walker proposes in Neuroqueer Theory, divergence is not error, it is refusal. ADHD queers time, structure, communication. It resists standardization not out of rebellion, but because its perceptual field is wide, too electric, too alive for fixed forms. ADHD is not the failure to follow the line, it is the capacity to draw another shape entirely. To draw that shape requires space, literal, emotional, conceptual. Dr. Laura Onnes-Webb urges us to see ADHD not as disorder but as unchanneled gift, passion, creativity, empathy, intuition. Dr. Thomas Armstrong expands this into the multiple intelligences model, noting that neurodivergence often excels outside verbal logical domains. The classroom, the workplace, the social script, all of these are designed to flatten difference into compliance. But what if ADHD isn't off-task, it's off-map? What if its scatteredness is simply a different cartography? What if, as Bareitzer and Berlant suggest, delay and detour are forms of care, not signs of failure, but other ways of being present? To be present differently is not to be absent. ADHD does not mark a lack of attention. It marks a different structure of attunement. As Brian Masumi might frame it, attention in ADHD is effective, not selective. It follows intensity, not priority. It is a form of relational intelligence that responds to what vibrates, not what commands. When a person with ADHD veers off topic, it is not random. It is often a leap across unspoken associations. Their focus is not scattered. It is multipolar. Michel Serres suggests that noise is not the opposite of order, but its condition. The ADHD mind hears the background hum. Its task is not to filter it out, but to move with it. This movement is often misread as instability, but it is choreography. Dr. Caroline Leaf's work on neuroplasticity insists that thought reshapes brain matter. Narrative literally becomes neural pathway. To tell the ADHD mind that it is broken is not just unkind, it is a form of epistemic violence. Miranda Fricker names this testimonial injustice, when someone's self-report is dismissed because of their perceived unreliability. ADHD individuals are often not believed, not because their accounts are incoherent, but because dominant frameworks cannot house nonlinear time, emotional logic, or inconsistency as intelligence. Thus, coherence must be reclaimed on different terms. Saidiya Hartman warns us against narrative compression, forcing stories to fit expectations of legibility. The ADHD story, like the ADHD mind, requires new narrative architectures, recursive, tangential, suspended. As Dr. Lisa Bareitzer explores in her theory of maternal time, presence can exist within interruption. Care can unfold slowly, incompletely, even while distracted. ADHD does not prevent care, it simply doesn't perform it in linear time. This kind of care is already practiced in neurodivergent communities. Jessica McCabe, through How to ADHD, offers tools that are less about correction and more about self-trust. Her work translates clinical language into lived empathy, turning shame into structure. Similarly, Renee Brooks's writing speaks directly to the racialized gendered exhaustion of masking and underdiagnosis. Their work, like Danny Donovan's visual diagrams, proves that ADHD expression is also ADHD pedagogy. The form of communication carries the insight. It doesn't just say, I think differently. It shows it. To show it without apology is a form of aesthetic resistance. It refuses the notion that clarity must be straight or that value must be immediate. ADHD may speak in fragments, but its fragments echo. It may loop, but its loops return charged. It may arrive late, but when it does, it carries a map that others didn't know was missing. What we call distraction may be the refusal to leave anything out. What we call disorder may be the body remembering something important that the task has forgotten. ADHD is not the failure to stay on track. It is the insistence that there are other tracks. Other tracks require other metrics. The ADHD mind cannot be fully understood through productivity, punctuality, or consistency. These are neurotypical currencies, often rooted in industrial time and colonial architectures of control. ADHD resists not because it lacks discipline, but because it experiences time as weight, as texture, as shape-shifting medium. Dr. Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory tells us that our ability to attend, connect, and act is filtered through the nervous system's state of safety. For many with ADHD, the body is not safe enough to comply. The executive dysfunction is not rebellion. It is a system stuck in freeze, in flight, in subtle dissociation from a pace it cannot match. Healing, then, is not about catching up. It's about pacing down. Dr. Tricia Hersey of the NAP Ministry reframes rest as refusal, as ancestral medicine, as justice. ADHD is often exhausted not by effort, but by performance, by the demand to appear regulated in systems built to misunderstand. Hersey's theology of slowness turns executive fatigue into spiritual clarity. You are not lazy. You are carrying more than you were meant to bear. In that bearing, ADHD becomes something more than diagnosis. It becomes philosophy. Bayo Akamalafi would say that ADHD interrupts our false urgencies, revealing the need to move with the weather of things, not against it. The ADHD mind doesn't linearize experience. It listens, it scans, it returns. ADHD does not obey the clock because it is keeping time with something else, something internal, effective, intergenerational. Saidiya Hartman might call this the fugitive tempo, the rhythm of those never meant to be legible, still making meaning. To live inside that meaning is to refuse epistemic flattening. It is to build a life where feedback loops are not shame spirals, but pattern recognition, where time isn't raced through, but metabolized, where rest is structured, not stolen, where silence is not failure, but recalibration, where collapse is not moral, it is structural, it is relational, it is sacred. ADHD becomes not the end of control but the beginning of design, a demand to architect days, relationships and tasks around cycles of clarity and saturation, not around false consistency. And so, the final lesson may be the simplest. The ADHD mind is not an apology. It is a different invitation. It says, build around me, not because I refuse to change, but because I know change only works when it listens. I do not need to be rewired. I need to be re-met. Where I spiral, make space. Where I leap, do not tether me. Where I collapse, stay near. Where I rest, do not rush me. I am not noise, I am signal. But you will have to change your frequency to hear it. To change frequency is not to lower standards, it is to shift the frame of reference. The ADHD mind does not fail to focus. It focuses according to a logic of urgency, novelty, and emotion. Dr. William Dotson's model reveals that importance alone does not move this mind. Only immediacy or resonance does. This is not moral failing, but motivational architecture. Dr. Caroline Leaf's work on neuroplasticity confirms that with repetition, belief becomes biology. If the ADHD mind is told it is broken, that message embeds itself in neural circuitry. But if told it is rhythmic, intuitive, and pattern-driven, it begins to trust its own loop. Trust does not begin in cognition. As Dr. Pat Ogden and Dr. Peter Levine show, it begins in the body. ADHD individuals often live in systems where their bodies are constantly suppressed, told to sit still, to stop interrupting, to just try harder. These commands trigger freeze or fawn responses, not focus. The solution is not willpower, but co-regulation. Bonnie Badenoch reminds us that the nervous system reorganizes in the presence of non-judgmental others. Healing comes through relational attunement, not solitary effort. ADHD becomes livable when the demand to perform normal is replaced with the offer to be as you are, and let's begin there. Begin there and you begin to notice the patterns, the unfinished lists, the over-preparation, the sudden bursts of brilliance, the emotional surges that arrive mid-sentence. Each is a signature, not a symptom. ADHD is not a single experience, but a landscape, terrain marked by time distortion, sensory saturation, and deeply felt contradiction. Dr. Lisa Bareitzer calls this care time, a temporal shaped not by deadlines but by relational rhythm. In this view, ADHD does not delay care. It demands care that matches its temporality, and it demands narrative forms that bend with it. Dr. Lauren Berlant's theory of slow death describes the attritional life of trying to live well inside systems that misread your needs. ADHD survival often looks like this: micro-burnouts, chronic masking, endless loops of self-correction. But as Michelle Sayers insists, what we call disorder may be unrecognized pattern. ADHD does not resist structure, it creates its own. The challenge is not to impose order, but to translate it. Translation is a practice of precision. Miranda Fricker's theory of epistemic injustice warns us that people with cognitive difference are often denied credibility before they even speak. ADHD individuals are interrupted, misdiagnosed, under-resourced, or dismissed as unreliable narrators of their own minds. This is not a cognitive issue, it is an ethical one. To write an ADHD-compatible life is to resist that erasure. It is to insist that recursive, emotional, non-linear insight is still insight, that loops are still logic, that the self formed in flashes and floods still counts as self. And that self, formed through recursion, refined through collapse, is not unfinished. It is simply operating on a different cadence. ADHD is not a deficit of closure, but a devotion to openness. It loops not to avoid landing, but to arrive in a way that makes sense to its structure. As Erin Manning says, the body doesn't close, it folds. The ADHD mind folds, refracts, delays, not as avoidance but as method. In its refusal to rush, it preserves the space for felt truth to emerge. In its silence, it protects something still forming. This is why the ADHD voice, when it speaks, carries the density of everything it has held back. The pause is not blankness, it is weather. The tangent is not departure, it is connective tissue. ADHD communication resists linearly because it is constantly mapping multiple threads. Danny Donovan's visual work illustrates this in real time, showing how a single moment can cascade through 20 associations, not because the mind is lost, but because it is alive to relation. This is ADHD's genius. It holds the whole field, not just the goal. But that field needs protection. Nick Walker's neuroqueer theory reminds us that divergence is not just cognitive, it is cultural, political, and aesthetic. To live with ADHD is to inhabit a form of queerness, a refusal to flatten perception, a challenge to how attention, time, and value are supposed to operate. Neuroqueering means unbuilding the systems that mistake flexibility for failure, emotions, multiplicity for noise. It means living in ways that aren't always interpretable and refusing to apologize for that opacity. Opacity is sacred. Saidiya Hartman writes toward the non-coherence of black life, insisting on forms of being that do not resolve for the comfort of the gaze. ADHD life, too, often lives in fragments, ruptures, improvisations. To demand coherence from it is to erase what it actually knows. It knows how to listen sideways. It knows how to return differently. It knows how to make meaning through rhythm, not repetition. ADHD does not forget, it remembers across dimensions. So the final refusal is this: no more stories where ADHD must be transcended to be lovable. No more scripts where regulation is a prerequisite for belonging. The ADHD mind does not need to become easier to manage. It needs to be met where it is luminous, where it loops, where it leaks insight. It needs not fewer feelings, but deeper structures to hold them. Not better focus, but better systems to honour how it moves. It needs to stop being asked to behave and start being asked what it knows. Because what it knows is not disorder. It is design, it is signal, and it is time we tuned in. Tuning in requires not just empathy, but architecture. It requires the creation of systems that do not punish variation, but adapt to it. Environments that shift their contours to fit bodies and minds that move in spirals, not lines. ADHD, when misunderstood, is seen as a disruption of function. When honoured, it becomes an invitation to redesign functionality itself. Dr. Joel Nigg's research into environmental influences, pollution, diet, stress underscores that ADHD is not housed solely in the brain. It is ecological. What if we built cities, classrooms, homes that accounted for sensory sensitivity and time-fluid cognition? What if ADHD didn't have to contort to survive? That survival is already visible in ADHD brilliance, in art that disorients with intention, in writing that pulses with recursion, in conversations that braid insight from unexpected corners. ADHD is not a blockage of thought, it is the floodgate open. The challenge is not how to control the surge, but how to channel it. Jessica McCabe's frameworks like body doubling, gamification and externalized memory are not tricks. They are cognitive exoskeletons, ways to house the mind without caging it. These are not compensations, they are adaptations, and every adaptation is a kind of authorship. Authorship is what is so often denied to neurodivergent individuals. Miranda Fricker's Epistemic Injustice reveals that people with ADHD are frequently told what they are, not asked. They are not invited to author their experience, only to submit to others' readings of it. This is why reclamation matters, not as rebranding, but as narrative sovereignty. To say I am not broken is not a correction, it is a rupture. It unhooks the self from diagnostic scripts and builds a new language of worth. Worth not earned through performance, but declared in the full presence of difference. Difference is not a detour, it is the terrain. Dr. Thomas Armstrong's Multiple Intelligences framework reveals that ADHD minds often shine in domains excluded from traditional metrics: spatial reasoning, musicality, bodily intelligence, emotional attunement. These are not side skills, they are core epistemologies. ADHD is not a barrier to knowing, it is a different vector of knowing, one that relies on rhythm, intuition, and affect. The friction arises not from the mind itself, but from systems designed to prize repetition over resonance, linearity over layering. So what would it mean to prize layering? To teach in loops? To design calendars that flex with saturation cycles, to recognize burnout as signal, not shame. It would mean ADHD would no longer be an invisible labor, but a visible intelligence. It would mean tools and strategies would be built not to mask, but to illuminate. It would mean no more translation fatigue, no more having to explain why a task undone does not mean a day wasted. It would mean being met in your native tempo and having that tempo woven into the collective rhythm. It would mean being understood as already complete. Already complete does not mean always regulated, always productive, or always clear. It means nothing essential is missing. The ADHD mind, so often described in terms of lack of attention consistency, discipline, is in fact saturated with perception. It does not fail to focus, it absorbs. It does not forget, it stores in nonlinear corridors. As Dr. Kristen Walumia's research shows, ADHD brains demonstrate unique activation patterns, often overengaged in default mode processing. That internal dialogue, the constant narration, rehearsal, simulation, is not noise. It is a form of recursive authorship where meaning is built across iterations, not conclusions. This recursive quality is not a glitch, it is a design feature. ADHD thinks in spirals, not lines. It revisits, reframes, recharges. What looks like delay is often emotional recalibration. Dr. Lisa Bareitz's concept of delay as care reframes this perfectly. To pause is not to abandon, but to attend. In ADHD, attending often requires detour. A task must feel possible emotionally, not just logically. And this is where shame becomes corrosive. not because it causes dysfunction, but because it interrupts the very loop that would allow return. Shame disconnects action from self-trust. Without trust, there can be no rhythm. Without rhythm, no clarity. So clarity must come from elsewhere, from systems that do not punish fluctuation, from relationships that expect inconsistency and respond with infrastructure, not disappointment, from internal scripts that put cycles of intense doing and necessary collapse. ADHD doesn't need to be compressed into normal. It needs to be designed around. This is the ethic of neurodivergent architecture. Build in pattern, softness, and pause. Build to hold storms, and build with a new metric. As Dr. Stuart Shanker emphasizes, self-regulation is not about suppression. It is about recognizing when demands exceed capacity and shifting in response. ADHD requires this kind of dynamic self-reading. The person who delays is not failing, they are calibrating. The person who interrupts is not rude, they are moving faster than language. The person who spirals is not weak, they are overloaded. What looks like misbehavior is often misattunement, and attunement, unlike control, creates space for the self to return. Return is everything. The ADHD life is marked not by constant presence, but by re-entry, by coming back after forgetting, restarting after stalling, repairing after rupture. This is not failure, it is resilience. The ADHD mind builds in recurrence. Its intelligence is not steady state but waveform. It does not hold focus like a grip. It dances with it like a tide. That dance is not unprofessional. It is not immature. It is not broken. It is human cognition doing what it has always done, adapting, improvising, and surviving in a world not yet built for its shape. To build a world for its shape is not to indulge chaos. It is to respect intelligence in its many tempos. ADHD does not need to be rescued from itself. It needs to be resourced. Resources are not just tools, they are ways of being met. Jessica McCabe teaches that externalizing memory, body doubling, or time blocking are not compensation strategies, but ways of honoring how ADHD tracks information across movement, through dialogue, in rhythm. These tools are architectural. They provide scaffolding for a mind that builds from the middle, not the edge. They are not ways to become normal. They are ways to live in fidelity to how one actually functions. That fidelity is rare in a culture that rewards sameness. ADHD, like all neurodivergence, challenges the central myth that selfhood is stable, that productivity equals virtue, that linear effort equals legitimacy. ADHD asks us to question what effort looks like when no one sees the inner work, the regulating, re-entering, recovering. Kieran Rose reminds us that the invisible labour of masking is a form of silent trauma. The cost of seeming fine can be cognitive collapse. Recovery then becomes not about regaining function, but about shedding performance. Shed the performance and something remarkable happens. Clarity doesn't vanish, it recalibrates. The ADHD mind, free from demand to conform, begins to surface its real knowing, pattern perception, emotional inference, intuitive decision-making, spatial logic. These are not soft skills, they are advanced, embodied cognition, forms of intelligence miscategorized because they don't sit still. Dr. Thomas Armstrong's model of multiple intelligences recognizes this. We must name these capacities not as extras, but as core. When ADHD is allowed to shape the system, not just survive it, new structures emerge, ones that prize resonance over repetition, rhythm over rigidity. But the shift is not just structural, it is intimate. ADHD is at its core a way of relating, to time, to information, to others. It is often portrayed as disruptive to relationships, yet it contains profound relational intelligence. The person who forgets the date may remember the tone of your voice 3 weeks ago. The person who misses the deadline may hold the emotional weight of the work longer than anyone else. ADHD often carries depth without containment, presence without punctuality. The challenge is not to fix these inconsistencies, but to build intimacy with them, to understand how the mind moves so the heart can stay with it. Staying with it, that's what the best allies do. Not offering solutions first, but space. Not shaming disarray, but helping hold its edges. Bonnie Badenoch's work reminds us, co-regulation is the core of healing. You don't have to be alone with the flood. ADHD may resist stillness, but it responds to steadiness. To the person who doesn't flinch when the words tumble. To the system that doesn't punish the pause. To the voice that says, take your time, I'm still here. And in that voice, the loop softens, the rhythm stabilizes, the mind at last is home. Home for the ADHD mind is not a place of stillness. It is a place of synchrony. It is where pacing is not corrected but mirrored, where spirals are not pathologized but understood as process. ADHD is not a life lived in error but in oscillation, in cycles of presence and drift, engagement and recalibration. And to live well within those cycles is not about mastering control, but about cultivating return. Return to focus, yes, but more importantly, return to self. Without shame, without apology, without the exhausting need to translate. Translation fatigue is real. As Miranda Fricker's concept of epistemic injustice affirms, the burden of constantly having to explain one's cognition to be believed erodes not just trust in systems, but trust in self. The ADHD individual is often disbelieved, not because they're unclear, but because their clarity arrives in unexpected forms. In image instead of sequence, in feeling instead of logic, in interruption instead of elaboration. When that form is not recognized as valid, the individual begins to internalize the error, not of their mind, but of the frame. To change the frame is to change the emotional landscape. ADHD does not just live in thought, it lives in affect, in the breath held before the deadline, in the heartbeat spike at the email chime, in the slow exhale of finally being seen. These somatic states are not noise around cognition, they are cognition. As Dr. Nicole Tetreault and Dr. Pat Ogden insist, emotional sensitivity and regulation are central to understanding ADHD. It is not the inability to think clearly, it is the inability to emotionally re-enter a task that has become saturated with pressure or failure. This is not disinterest, it is an overwhelmed nervous system choosing safety. Safety changes everything. Dr. Resmaa Menakem's work reveals how bodies conditioned by trauma and systemic misattunement respond not to logic but to signals of threat or care. ADHD, particularly in marginalized individuals, is often an accumulation of such signals. It is not merely neurobiological, it is socio-political, shaped by histories of over-policing, underdiagnosis, misrecognition. For black, brown, queer, disabled and poor bodies, ADHD may not only be invisible, it may be punished when it becomes visible. Healing then must be collective. It must attend not just to neurobiology, but to structural safety and cultural recognition. And in that collective field, a new form of attention becomes possible. Not attention as compliance, but attention as intimacy. To be attended to without pressure to perform, to be seen without demand to explain, to be mirrored without judgment. This is the atmosphere in which ADHD begins to unfold, not as problem, but as pattern, a rhythm with its own logic, a mind with its own ecology. ADHD is not broken time. It is time held differently. And when others learn to hold it with you, coherence no longer means becoming like everyone else. It means becoming more like yourself, finally, fully, fluently. Fluency in this context is not about mastery over one's mind, but intimacy with its cadence. The ADHD mind is not something to be conquered, it is something to be befriended. It moves in pulses, not plans. It trusts in momentum, not linearity. And once that rhythm is recognized by systems, by relationships, by the self, what once felt like failure begins to take shape as form. Dr. Eugene Gendlin's concept of the felt sense clarifies this. Meaning arrives not fully formed, but as a bodily murmur, a texture beneath language. The ADHD mind hears this texture first. The task is to learn how to follow it without collapsing under its speed. This following is not passive, it is creative. It means designing workflows that respond to affective states, not just time blocks. It means allowing thought to arrive through sketch, through movement, through sound. It means treating overwhelm not as interruption, but as saturation. A call to change input, not increase effort. ADHD management is not just about minimizing distraction. It is about aligning energy with resonance. When the mind is held by something emotionally real, its attention deepens not in spite of ADHD, but because of it. Hyperfocus, then, is not anomaly. It is the natural state of a mind in flow. And yet, the demand to exit flow for deadlines, for forms, for externally imposed sequences fractures this alignment. The result is collapse, the shutting down of systems that have been asked to function on incompatible frequencies. Dr. Lauren Berlant calls this slow death, the attrition that comes from trying to maintain coherence in the face of institutional misfit. ADHD lives here often, not in dramatic meltdowns, but in the quiet erosion of self-trust, in the cumulative weight of being out of sync. But what if we measured coherence not by duration or discipline, but by truth? that truth would not be clean. It would spiral, it would shift, it would forget and return, but it would be felt. ADHD is not a state of confusion. It is a state of recursive clarity, building sense over time through layers, echoes, and patterns. Dr. Bayo Akomolafe reminds us that slowness is not failure, it is care. To move slowly enough to feel what is actually happening, to re-enter the body's rhythm, to let knowing emerge sideways. This is ADHD wisdom. It does not arrive on schedule, but it arrives exactly when it's ready. And when it does, it brings the whole room with it. The context, the mood, the memory, the unspoken tension, the unexpected thread. It brings life, not just attention. That life resists being compressed into minutes and milestones. It asks for spacious metrics. Did you feel heard today? Did your mind speak in its native tempo? Were you met with scaffolding, not skepticism? These are the new measures. Not just for ADHD justice, but for human design. The ADHD mind is not a deviation to correct. It is a signal to redesign the world around what we've been told to dismiss. It is an invitation to remake attention as something generous, non-linear, and fully alive. To remake attention as fully alive is to honor its variability as wisdom, not weakness. ADHD does not fail to attend, it attends to more than what the system can name. This is not dysfunction, it is divergence. It is the mind listening to emotional tone before information, scanning for meaning before instruction, pausing not from defiance, but from intuitive overload. It is the recognition that what moves the ADHD mind is not task importance, but internal alignment. And that alignment is not static, it is relational, rhythmic, responsive. As Dr. Ari Tuckman observes, success with ADHD is not about increasing effort, but reducing friction between system and self. Reducing that friction means rethinking what success even is, not as uninterrupted output, but as sustainable presence, not as sameness across time, but as cyclical capacity. To live well with ADHD is to structure for return, not permanence, to work in bursts without apology, to plan not only for doing, but for recovery. As Tricia Hersey insists, rest is not what happens when the work is done. It is the work. The ADHD mind, with its intensity and collapse, is not incompatible with structure. It simply needs structure that breathes. This is the beginning of a new design language, one that builds around pattern, not perfection. It means creating systems where task initiation honors emotion, where productivity includes the right to pause, where memory is supplemented, not judged, where time is scaffolded, not weaponized. It means recognizing that ADHD is not a set of failures to comply, but a set of insights about what kinds of pacing, holding, and seeing a mind needs to thrive. And it means changing not only how we treat ADHD, but how we listen to it. ADHD is not just a difference to accommodate, it is a different form of knowledge, one that arrives in tone, in association, in movement, one that tracks mood, relational energy and atmospheric detail before it tracks sequence. It is not disorder, it is distributed attention, it is emotional logic, it is tempo-based perception. And once it is met on its own terms, it begins to translate itself not as noise, but as signal, complex, recursive, rhythmic, and fully human. This is not a fix, this is a fluency, a new grammar of cognition, a way of being with the world that does not flatten it into deadlines, but opens it into resonances. The ADHD mind does not need to be taught how to think, it needs permission to move as it already knows how to move. And in that permission, in that mutual recalibration, a new kind of coherence emerges. Not the coherence of order, but the coherence of attunement. Not stillness, but sync. Not control, but relation. Relation, not regulation, becomes the foundation of a livable ADHD life. To be in relation with one's own rhythms, with systems that flex, with others who stay steady through drift, is not a luxury. It is the condition for thriving. Bonnie Badenoch teaches that coherence is not achieved through isolation or effort, but through connection, through being seen without judgment. The ADHD mind, when held in this way, doesn't collapse under its own spirals. It spirals into form. It loops into language. It builds meaning that cannot be rushed because it is not linear. It is alive. To be alive in this way is to move against the grain of a culture that defines success by uniformity, clarity, speed. ADHD refuses this, not because it seeks rebellion, but because its tempo reveals what the dominant tempo erases: rest as knowledge, drift as inquiry, delay as discernment. The ADHD mind reclaims these, not as flaws to be corrected, but as forms of ethical attention. Attention that feels, reorients, returns. Attention that dares to go slow where speed is expected. Attention that is generous with ambiguity. This generosity is the gift often overlooked. ADHD minds tend to over-empathise, over-attune, over-process, because they are not just managing information, they are metabolising context. Every interaction is sensory. Every task is emotional. Every misstep is a wave carried in the body long after the moment has passed. But what if that sensitivity is not excess? What if it is capacity? Not fragility, but precision. The ADHD mind, when allowed to integrate rather than mask, reveals a deep capacity to sense what others miss, to feel the undercurrents, to notice the emotional weather, to name the thing no one said but everyone felt. And this is where the story turns. ADHD is not a narrative of repair, it is a narrative of return. Return to tempo, return to intuition, return to the body as source of information, not site of failure. ADHD does not ask to be fixed, it asks to be followed. Its loops are not mistakes, they are intelligence searching for its shape. Its pauses are not absences, they are recalibrations. Its interruptions are not rudeness, they are resonance arriving faster than form can hold. To live well with ADHD is to design around these truths, to write schedules that expect recursion, to build relationships that survive silence, to name exhaustion before it becomes erasure. It is to stop asking the mind to be linear when its brilliance lives in constellation. It is to let go of the story that says coherence is a straight line, and instead live the one that says coherence is when the whole system finally hums in tune. Until next time.
You've been listening to the Deeper Thinking podcast. Today's episode was narrated by Holly, our digital narrator, who helps bring our ideas to life. For further reading, research and ways to support the podcast, please visit the episode webpage. Thank you for your positive reviews on Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help keep us visible so others can discover and enjoy our content.